a admissions director at Stanford who had reported directly to Derek Bolton, announced that he was leaving and going to Tuck School. I haven't spoken to him yet, but that's the first question I'm going to ask him. Anyway, the big issue, of course, is will Harvard and Wharton follow suit and keep everything the same? You know, over at Harvard, Chad Losey has now been through his first year as a new admissions director. He took over from D. Leopold. And I think that there is a fair amount of speculation that he will introduce some changes now that he's been through the cycle for a full year. And so, of course, that's probably going to happen over the next 2 weeks. We'll find out about that. And believe me, you will be able to read it here first, because the moment it happens, it will be on the homepage of the website. Wharton actually bucked the industry trend last year by adding back an essay to their application. Some of you who follow this may know that in the last 5 years, one school after another has actually reduced their essay requirements. Regardless of what the three schools do, you need to know that every year they attract in total about 25,000 applications. They are among the most selective schools in the world. And so the big issue is, how do you get an edge? How do you stand out from the pile? It's not so easy, because in every pool, probably 75–80% of the people who actually submit an application are fully qualified to attend these schools. And when a school is accepting, in the case of Stanford, 6%, or Harvard 11%, or Wharton slightly under 20%, that means there are a lot of really good, exceptional people who don't make it. So our Fortuna team is going to help us kind of navigate through this process. Let me introduce the panel. First off, I need to just say, you know, Fortuna is a premier firm. It started 5 years ago by several former directors of admissions, sort of a dream team. And currently, actually, they have 12 of the top 15 gatekeepers from the top schools on the staff. And so they've been on the inside. They know what it's like to get an application, to sit in the room and discuss it, and to make decisions about whether to accept, reject, or put you on the wait list. And that's why I think their insights are especially crucial to applicants. First, let me introduce Judith Silverman Hodara, who actually is profiled on the site. If you want to read my profile of her that was done years ago already, my goodness. And actually, we even have video of Judith and one of her colleagues, Caroline, on the site. You can look that up by just going to Poets and Quants colon Google and put Judith's name in there. She is a core member of the admissions committees, had been at Penn for almost 2 decades. And in her last role at Penn, she was the acting director of Wharton's MBA program. And while at Wharton, Judith shaped incoming Wharton classes on a number of years, and reviewing thousands of applications and meeting and interviewing thousands of prospective students. We also have with us today Malvina Miller Complainville, who is the resident Harvard Business School expert at Fortuna. Malvina is a former assistant director of career services at HBS, and as head of HBS Programs and Communication team, she was responsible for providing career training and guidance to students. She's also a senior coach at Fortuna now, having coached dozens of clients who've been admitted to Harvard and other N7 schools. And last but not least, HIllis. Heidi has extensive admissions experience as well. She's a Stanford GSB MBA. She was student chair of the school's global management program, and was also alumni interviewer on campus for several years. Her passion for international business has led her around the globe. She was a director of microfinance for a nonprofit in Russia, a management consultant for McKinsey in London, a senior product manager for a European e-commerce company, and a finance director for a very large South American telecom company. So it's amazing that we actually can get Heidi to stay in one place for this webinar and help all of you. Also in the background, someone you're not going to see are a couple of members of the Fortuna team, and they're going to help us with your questions and move us along. So let's just take a quick look at the agenda before we move on to the session. We're going to talk about what's new this season, what are the top schools looking for, how can candidates stand out in the applicant pool, what's a good timeline for application planning. I can tell you right away, start immediately if you haven't started already. What's a good, what are common mistakes that are made by applicants to elite schools? How do you sort of do a roadmap of your journey to business school? And then we're going to finish with Q&A, and hopefully all of you will have a good number of questions. Now, here's a little just bookkeeping or housekeeping points. If you have any technical issues, there's Melissa Jones. You can send her a direct note in the chat box, and she can try to help you. Melissa, I should point out, we just did a story where we looked at the most favorably reviewed MBA admission consultants in the world. Melissa was #1. Congratulations to Melissa. In fact, there were 2 of the top 10 are at Fortuna. And we're going to try to leave about 15 minutes for the Q&A, so you can just type your questions at any time during the session. We'll get to them at the end into the questions box on the control panel on your screen. Finally, if you have to sign off early, we're recording the session so you can come back and read the full version on the fortunaadmissions.com website. All right, so let's start. Heidi, let's start with you, and let's take a look at the GSB application. So as I said before, it's the 13th year that the school has run with What Matters Most to You. Why do you think this essay is so timeless?
Thanks, John. Well, I think it is a timeless essay. It's been 13 years. It's pretty incredible that it's still there. But I think that why it's still there is that it gets really to the heart of what the GSB is really all about. The GSB wants to get to know the candidate, to really get to know the candidate, and to go beyond the list of accomplishments, beyond the resume. They want to understand what motivates each candidate, what he or she is passionate about, and how his or her goals would coincide with the vision of the school, which, as you know, is to change lives, change organizations, change the world. So this essay has proven over the years to be able to do this by allowing the candidate to talk about his or her values, motivations, aspirations, and in so doing, demonstrate their potential as a change agent. I think Stanford puts a lot of emphasis on the candidate's personal qualities and their ability to contribute to their peers and to the school at large. And this essay, along with the interview, is perhaps the best place for the candidate to showcase this. So it can demonstrate how the person thinks. It can give an indication of how they will interact with other students. The GSB is looking for people who are open and curious, who are interested in debate and in stimulating conversations, and those who are willing and able to challenge their own assumptions. And so a thoughtful essay about what matters most to you can demonstrate all of these things. So that's why I really try to push my clients to go deep and to try to answer this question as honestly and with as much humility as possible. It can sometimes feel a little bit like therapy, but a good essay will make the person reading it want to meet the candidate and to find out more. So my advice is generally to, be honest. Don't overthink it. Don't try to write what you think they want to hear, but rather write the truth. What does matter most to you? Another piece of advice I like to give clients is to give it time. So start early, be prepared to do many iterations, and let it sit in between. Just let it, there's a lot of stuff that can kind of come out of this process, and the longer you give the process, the more it will kind of have fruit. And then last but not least, you got to dig deep, and when you think you're ready, dig a little deeper.
Now, Heidi, when you applied to GSB, was that question on the application?
No, it was after my time. So.
Oh, really? You look too young.
I know. It's hard to believe, but.
All right. So Judith, when you were in charge of admissions at Wharton, how did you decide what essay questions to ask? I always think that's sort of an interesting thing. It may say something about the head of admissions, the admissions committee, and the school as much as it says about the candidate who has to answer the question?
It's a great question, and it's something that usually happened after we had gone through our May deadline, and we knew for the most part who was going to be in the class. Everyone was pretty relieved that we had a great incoming group of students. We sort of knew what the lay of the land was going to be, and we would sit down. The entire team would get together and talk about the question that we had used, and also talk about the questions that we got about the question. So, when you're out on the road, as we all were, chatting with students, meeting with, prospective communities, we would talk a lot about the question, and sometimes it was an interesting, what candidates are thinking in their mind, and what do you think of this approach, and would this work, and do I really need to, and what if this example does A, B, and C, but so we would sort of use a lot of feedback, really from I'm going to use the word client, which, the candidate, the people that were going through this and what they thought of it. And then we would say, well, we would talk as a team, do you feel that the information you were getting from this year's question was really helping you to understand where the candidate was coming from, what mattered to them, how they saw themselves at the school? We would do a lot of tweaking, and certainly over time those questions would get completely thrown out and started again with a new batch. So it is interesting and refreshing to start from scratch, but it's also a bit unnerving because you have no baseline. So what we found over the years was that sometimes, and as you mentioned earlier, a couple of years ago, most of the schools went down to one question. Wharton, after that drawback, felt like 400 words just wasn't enough. They weren't getting the full story. They really wanted to ask something additional. They felt like maybe it was fairer to the candidates to give them an additional platform. And I think it's really like a juggling act to figure out, what are you getting, what's enough, but not what is so overwhelming to be a deterrent. And then, to me, the sidebar to this is, what other ways in admissions could we give them to tell their story? So are we giving them enough of a platform in their recommenders? Are there enough opportunities for them within the application form itself to talk about things that matter to them? Do they have the opportunity to share things that have propelled them forward or have been a part of their professional development? And that's really how the question came out. I will add that there was usually a 2-week period, usually around now, a little bit later, where there was a lot of back and forth about word choice and is what we're asking exactly what we want to be getting essay answers on. Because don't forget, at the end of the day, in my day, we were reading about 8,500 essays a season, and that's a lot. And if you don't like your question, it's a heck of a lot. So right. It was really a process that we tried. It was almost like, in a way, it was like 360 feedback. Like we were taking input from the candidates, we were taking our own experiences, and then we were thinking about what are the values and the mission of the institution, and how do we want to play that out within the context of how we're learning about these folks.
Right.
And it wasn't always easy. I have to say it was definitely a long, considered discussion. And I'm always eager to see when schools come up with new questions. Well, how are they approaching that, and what are they looking to get out of the candidate in that conversation?
Right. All right. Do you think there are any real differences among the M7 in terms of what the admission teams at the so-called Magnificent Seven schools are really looking for in candidates?
I do. I think that if you look at not only how the schools talk about themselves, but how I love this exercise. I always tell our students, talk to people that have graduated recently, talk to people that graduated 5 years ago, and then go talk to people that graduated 20 years ago, and see the lifetime and the impact of their education and what they felt was most important about the institution. So I know that the schools talk about themselves, and they all have their catchphrases, and they all have their missions, and you can kind of get a sense as you interact with people if you go on a school visit. And the schools definitely, put that out into the universe. But what's also important is the feeling that the students themselves, the candidates themselves, get out of the institution. And I mean, Harvard, if writ large, is known for leadership, and Stanford is known for innovation, and Wharton is known, so I could go run down the M7 list, and it's almost as if the schools are looking to build, they have this wonderful opportunity to build a class of individuals that are going to interact with each other, participate in class, be members of their larger community, and then go out into the world and make their way as well. So all of these things are sort of part of the mix of what the schools are looking for. And I think, you know, I sat on the Wharton committee, and there are differences between what's important in each of the classrooms. Some of the schools are looking for a stronger quant score. Some of the schools are looking for more work experience. Some of the schools are looking for, have you had a tremendous community impact? Have you been an innovator? So yes, among all the M7, there are going to be slight differences, but at the end of the day, it's a lot about putting together those individuals and also how the student sees themselves within that context. So they may be a great candidate for more than one school, but it's really how they're presenting what they're bringing to that opportunity that I think the school is going to pick up on. And lastly, even if a school says, you know, we're really interested in leadership and leadership experiences, they're not going to bring in a class that only has that. You know, they're going to bring in people that are going to bring different kinds of things to the conversation, and kind of, you know, engage and change the dynamic of a classroom. So that to me is also really important. You may in your mind have, you know, this is what I'm assuming the school is like, but then there's a whole universe of people that are nothing like that mission or nothing like, you know, what you might be expecting, and bring so much to that group as well. So kind of a long answer.
Yeah, but that last point's interesting because it brings to mind, you know, a real truth about MBA admissions in particular, which is this. You know, in some cases, there's just stuff that's out of control of the applicant. And one of the things that's out of control is, you know, the sense that admissions directors craft a class with diverse points of view from diverse geographies, backgrounds, and perspectives, so that those class discussions are rich and vivid and add as much to the education as they possibly can. And sometimes you just don't know what part of that puzzle, you know, you may be fitting into because you're on the outside of that process. So Malvina, Harvard, your old stomping grounds, enjoys an admissions yield of 91%. For those of you out there who are new to admissions and this whole game, what yield is the percentage of admitted candidates who actually enroll at a school. 91% is exceptionally high, the highest of any school, any business school in the world for sure. And Stanford's way up there too, in the mid-80s. So I guess my question to you is, what exactly is Harvard looking for to allow a candidate to get into that 91% yield rate?
I think that actually Judith touched on some of the qualities that HBS is looking for: the strong leadership skills, the leadership potential, the ability to influence, motivate, convince, inspire people, affect change, really thinking of leadership more as a we as opposed to an I. The other thing to think about with HBS is, you know, you have large classes of 900 plus students. However, they work in sections. So each, you know, your first year, you're broken out in sections. So you're in a classroom with 90 students, and you'll be with those 90 students throughout the first year. You're taking all those courses with the same 90 students. And when HBS is looking to build that class, and they're thinking about those sections, to your point, John, they need to have diversity in terms of professional background and industry experience, nationalities, etc. And that's extremely important in order to have that rich dialogue, in order to really benefit from the case study method. So they're going to be looking at that. And John, you're right. It's very hard to know who else is applying and how do I fit in, you know, within that pool. You can look at past trends, and for example, the class of 2017, 16% of the students came from consulting, 17% came from VCPE, 11% came from financial services, 14% came from high tech or communications. So you have some idea of where, you know, large groups of students are coming from, and it's part of the candidate's task or homework to really work on building that, you know, what is it that makes me unique? What's my unique selling proposition?
Right, exactly. And then you have the other issue, which is often something that a lot of people don't get, which is in most cases, people are competing not with everyone in the pool, but within a certain segment of the pool. So if you're an Indian engineer, you're in that overrepresented category of other Indian engineers, and sadly, there are so many of them that even the average acceptance rates don't really apply. And if you have a common profile, like you're an investment banker or a management consultant, you're also in really large pools. So the question, Heidi, is how do you stand out if you are an iBanker or you are a consultant and you know that the applicant pool at any given school is predominantly filled by iBankers and consultants and Indian engineers?
Well, I think it gets back again to what we've been talking about, which is demonstrating that you have a unique perspective. So even if you have a common profile, what's going to set you apart is what you've taken away from all of those experiences that you've had. You have to be able to show that even though you might have had experiences that are common to many consultants or investment bankers, that you have somehow been able to take something more from that experience, that you have this ability to be self-reflective, you're self-aware, you know what's important, you can see the big picture, and to be able to convince the admissions team that you do have something that is going to be worth offering to the class in this mix that they're trying to construct. And I think that you can try to work on showing also that you're more than just a consultant, more than just a banker, more than just an analyst.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Looking to show that you have, finding the right recommendations and recommenders who will help you craft this story that you have a lot more to offer than just those specific skills in how to do an Excel model. So looking for really strong leadership examples that show your leadership potential, I think, is really important.
So Judith, just drawing on to follow on this theme, drawing on your experience working in the admissions office at Wharton, give us a little perspective on how you put together a diverse class. I mean, what were you looking at? What were you thinking about? What did the admissions committee? What were those discussions like in that room?
They were kind of a fun culmination. I'm just going to pause and put on a headset. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Sorry.
I have an echo too, so I don't know if it's the.
There we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. So they were really fun opportunities. We really would get together after the initial screening and talk with the students, and talk with the committee about, who were we getting to know during the process. We, in many cases, had read so many of these files, we'd pass them along one another, right? So the files at Wharton were usually read by more than one person, so it wasn't just me making a decision, it was really 3 or 4 people that had their eyes on the file. We'd all given our comments, and we would have very robust conversations, sometimes till way after midnight, really sharing what we knew about the candidates and making a case for why it was that they were going to be a terrific addition to the class. And I think that's something that sometimes candidates don't always understand, is that schools are really advocating for you. And they want you to have a positive experience. We weren't going through and saying reject, 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 reject. On the contrary, we were looking for why do you want to admit? Make your case. What is it that this person is bringing? I know we've seen 7 consultants in the past hour, but what's so special about this one in particular? So to me, it was a very engaging, uplifting conversation. I'll also add that because a lot of admissions work can be solitary, so you're reading files day after day after day in either your office or the library or your living room, and to be able to come together and really get into the stories of the candidates and to understand everything that they're presenting to you, I think was really very uplifting. And it was sometimes fraught. I mean, admittedly, we would get into heated conversations. And that's when I think that there was a tremendous amount of respect around that table, and that we were really able to come together with a common understanding of what our goal was. So it's not, saying no is not easy. I know that sounds like I'm playing to the crowd, but it's a hard one, and my heart broke a lot of times for someone that I was really a champion of, and it just wasn't a fit. So it's an experience that really felt like a great opportunity, a little bit like a culmination of a lot of work and a lot of outreach and a lot of really getting to know who was in front of you. So right. I liked the opportunities, as hard as they may have been.
So let's play a little game maybe. Let's say I've been working at one of the Big Four audit firms, or maybe I've been working at one of the consulting firms, or maybe I'm an analyst at an investment bank or a software engineer. What do you recommend that I can do to help me stand out in a crowded pool? Who wants to take that?
Heidi.
I can have a go. There we go. I think it's really looking in your background and looking for examples of where you have gone above and beyond kind of this role that's kind of the typical consultant, analyst, engineer, whatever it is, to show that you have that other dimension. So even though you might have had some amazing experiences within your area of expertise, it's really finding those great examples that show that you have the potential to be much more than that. So for example, I had a client who was on the derivatives desk at Goldman Sachs in London, and she had so many examples of her analytical prowess and how she was able to build these great models. But we really tried to focus, and in the end, in her essays and in some other parts of the application, we focused on more her ability to build bridges. So for example, she had she'd initiated these weekly calls with some of her colleagues in the US to explain to their clients how events in Europe are going to affect their portfolios. And this did not bring any business to her. It didn't even bring any business to Goldman in London, but it really strengthened the relationships for the US bankers with their clients and also between the two offices. And so we use this as an example to show how, beyond her being able to do the work, she was able to really build these bridges and play a much more leadership role. And I think that's what's important, is it's trying to find specific examples, real examples, because all these schools are going to be looking at your past actions as a predictor of your future success. So finding those great examples that can really illustrate that you have the potential to be a real leader or a change agent.
I imagine that's a big role that a consultant plays, because it's kind of like sometimes we're the worst people on our own to figure out what makes us actually unique. Mm-hmm. And sometimes listening to one's narrative of a life and having a thoughtful person draw another out can bring to the surface these nuances and differences that allow an investment banker to be more than an investment banker, a software engineer to be more than a software engineer, or an accountant at an audit firm to be more than an accountant in the application pool. Anyone else have a really good example like that one that Heidi just gave?
I feel like sometimes when you're a couple of years out of college, you consider yourself, I'm a blank. And I always say to my clients, let's imagine you're going to a bar and you're sitting next to somebody, man or a woman, and you want to talk to them. You're going to be a lot more than just a blank, right? You're going to be more than what you do for a living. You're going to be someone that has had experiences, and maybe you've traveled, and maybe you come from a family of 7 kids, and maybe you supported yourself through college. And so I try to get them out of, this is the box that I am considering myself in. And half the time they don't even, as Heidi said, they don't even imagine how another person is seeing them. And it's to me, it's not really like, would I want to sit next to them on an airplane, which I know is kind of a common rubric that's used. It's more, if I am actively engaging with someone sitting next to me, what do I want them to know about my background and what's important about the things that have shaped me? So that's kind of, to me, the part that we really try to get to in the beginning. And a lot of the students that we work with, they say that our initial questionnaire, our initial strategy questionnaire, is really hard and really good. And I like that, because if we're not kind of encouraging you to get a little deeper, as Heidi said, and then a little deeper and dig some more, then we're not really doing our job. So we want to kind of get them to get to the roots, and then sort of go through the progression of how'd you get to where you are at the age of 25 or 26, and you believe that you want to go to business school as your next step. But it is not uncommon just out of college, if you work. I'm thinking, let's just talk about any of the consulting firms. There's going to be 50 of you that are all looking the same on a daily basis. You're all doing projects. You're all out of the office somewhere. But there are things that are going to make you stand out, and that's what we love about what we do, finding those things.
Mm-hmm.
And Judith, I imagine you did that on the other side as well, because one of the interesting parts of your job at Wharton were these half-day sessions where you and the staff were reviewing profiles that had already been screened for quality. Can you give us a little insight of how those sessions work?
Sure. It is, you kind of, at that time, we would get a stack. I know things have changed dramatically, and towards the end of my time we were working more electronically, but we would get a stack and we would go through, and some of it, it is very different. I've also done undergraduate advising, where when I worked in undergrad, you would get, we called it a slate, and you would get a slate of 30 kids from the same high school, and you could compare them. It was incredibly easy, because you would just run down their GPAs, look at their class rosters, and then kind of go into the next phase of it. So you could kind of start to do your separation. With MBAs, there's really not a roster that's coming from, certain industries or certain educational backgrounds. And so, as I mentioned a little earlier, it is a lot about sort of, going through and assuming, as you said, 80 to 85% of the people that are applying are admissible, right? You're not going to apply to the M7 schools unless you think you academically are going to be able to handle the work. There sort of weren't a lot of one-offs that were scoring a 400 on the GMAT and had a 2.3 GPA applying. It was self-selecting, right?
Yeah, totally.
So after that, we would really go through and as I was speaking earlier, like, look for these nuggets that were going to help us understand you. Look for those examples. Look for the examples, and here's a good tip, that are not only professionally based. Where else have you had leadership? Where else did you mentor? If you're in the workforce for 3, 4, or 5 years, you might not have any direct reports, but you sit on a board, or you work for a local organization, and you're working in a team, and you have people that you're interacting with, and maybe you're mentoring a couple of them. So I think that sometimes candidates believe that they have to provide this sort of bento box, if you will, of information, and it's going to fit really neatly into those paradigms. But in fact, what we were looking for in those sessions, once we got through, as you said, sort of the screening process, was the what else, and what, and then ultimately, how does this help us build a class? And that to me was really important, encouraging the candidates as we were out on the road, and we traveled so extensively. Starting in about July, we would be on the road, through part of round 1 deadline, and then again in January. We would tell them not to be afraid to really share the things that were important to them, because there was nothing that we were looking for. There wasn't sort of a set checklist of the following 7 things you had to be in order to be admitted.
Right. Yep. So let's, we have about 8 minutes or so before we get into the Q&A. So anyone in the audience who has some questions, fill in that question box, and we will try to get to them in the last 15 minutes of the presentation. But let's talk about common mistakes people make in either the application or when they show up for an admissions interview. What are they, and how can we avoid them? Malvina, you want to take that one?
Sure. I could say one thing that I see a lot is not doing enough research, not reaching out to the school community. So it's really a very important part of the application process, and candidates shouldn't hesitate to reach out to clubs, to reach out to students, alumni, faculty, to try to have as many points of contact with the school community and get a sense of what the school culture is, what the offering is, what the teaching method is, it's so important that the candidate can talk about that in the interview and can allude to it in the application as well.
And tell me why that's important.
You need to be able to say, why is HBS the solution for you to reach your goals? What is the offer? What is it that HBS offers that will allow you to reach your goals? Think about the person behind the desk making those decisions. Why should I take X over Y? You need to convince them that going to HBS, tapping into that network, working with the case method, etc., will help you achieve those goals, will help you become a successful leader.
So the more research you do and the more people you speak to will help inform a thoughtful, intelligent response, right?
Exactly. And if you can talk to the culture of the school, and I think the best way to do that is really to speak to as many people as possible. If you can show that you have some knowledge about the school culture, that will go a long way in making a convincing argument.
I love what Judith said earlier about talk to current students, talk to alumni 5 years out, talk to alumni 10 or 20 years out, and ask them, how has this education shaped your life? Because I think those multiple perspectives could come really in handy during an interview, or just in thinking about, why do I fit here, and why is this school and MBA program especially good for me? Mm-hmm. Heidi, do you have a common error that you often see candidates make?
Well, I think on the interview, I think that there's a couple of things that can happen. One is obviously not being prepared enough, which is just thinking that you can go in and the questions are going to be pretty easy and that you can just wing it. Obviously, preparation is key for the interview, and you need to be able to nail your resume, have several examples that you might fall back on to answer any kind of question that might come up. But I also think that people can come into interviews too prepared. So you really don't want to come in as too rehearsed. Sometimes if you're so prepared that you end up not listening to the questions the interviewer is asking and answering a different question, which can also be quite bad. So I think it's important to really, prepare as much as you can and then relax, go in, and really try to focus in the moment on the interview and what's happening there, and not think so much about, I need to say this, I forgot to say that, I want to make sure I get that in. It's also okay in the interview to pause and to be thoughtful and to show the person that you're thinking about the question, especially if you don't have an answer right away. So just remember in the interviews that they're looking for, they're looking for fit, they're looking for poise, they're looking for how you handle stressful situations. It's not always about the right answer. So I think it's trying to understand a bit more about the interview itself.
I want to jump in for just a second. And Derek Bolton always used to say, remember, an interview is like a dance, and you are not the lead. So you have to let your... It was like the greatest quote. I was on a panel with him once in New York a couple of years ago, and he said that. Oh, you're right. Like, you have to be led by your interviewer. You're not the one controlling the steps. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, and certainly one that I think a lot of applicants should keep in their minds too.
Yeah. And Judith, what are the most common mistakes you see or have seen?
I feel like sometimes candidates don't always consider who they are as individuals. They kind of, the first conversation might be, I want to go to an M7. I'm going to go in rank order. And it may be that, NYU is a great fit for you, but you haven't thought about it because you're kind of caught up in the schools that are ranked above it. And I really, that's why the research piece that Malvina was talking about, and really getting to know what it is 2 years, it's a lot of opportunity cost, it's a community that you're going to be connected to for the rest of your life. And we're seeing this now with students that are struggling. I have somebody now who's considering Yale and Wharton, and I think that Yale's a better fit for him. But I think that he's really drawn to Wharton because Yale is still, in his mind, up and coming. And I'm not going to use air quotes, but you kind of know what I mean. Up and coming. They've been around for a really long time. So I think that there's an internal struggle, and I have no problem with rankings, but I really want students to be aware that that is one part of their personal journey going through this, and not to just use it as the list that is their Bible, and that's how they're going to approach this.
Yeah.
And again, we do a lot of qualitative discussion, and that is really what we hope we get out of those conversations as we're getting through the initial set of questions that the candidates are asking us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And let me just say, in regards to rankings, that rankings can't measure some things that are actually more important than what they can measure. They can't measure a school's resources. They can't measure, or they don't measure, the actual strength of an alumni network and how valuable it is to you throughout your career. They can't measure things like work experience and the value of it, or the undergraduate education you're coming from, or the company you're coming from, because those things are not easily reduced to a single metric. And yet those things have a lot to do with the overall quality of a school. Other thing that rankings don't measure is how much investment is a university making in the program itself. There are universities that are primarily supported by tuition and fees, and then there are other schools that have the benefit of a large endowment and a very generous alumni base, so that they're actually willing and able to essentially subsidize an MBA education to a level that you actually get more bang for your buck, and that's totally invisible to most people because those numbers are rarely disclosed. Anyway, before we get to the questions, one last thing: timetable. So for someone who's planning to apply in the 2017-2018 season, how should they get started, and what should be their timeline or plan of attack? Malvina, you have a sense of that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a good idea to give yourself enough time, 2-3 months. The most time you can, really. You have to think of the GMAT, but you also have to spend enough time doing a self-reflection, an assessment of where you're at, of where you want to go, what your goals are, what your short-term goals, what your long-term goals are. Spend time researching the various programs. So all of that takes quite a lot of time. You have the recommenders. It's always a good idea to identify recommenders and start having conversations with them 2 months really before the deadline, so you have time to work with them and help guide them. In the content that you would like for them to develop. You have the applications. With HBS, my advice is always to make sure you look at the applications before you write the essay, because HBS specifically asks that you provide in the essay only information that is not provided outside of within the application already. So you have various elements. You have the GMAT, you have your self-reflection, developing your career goals, updating your resume, reaching out to recommenders, working with your recommenders, identifying them, filling out your applications, your essays, and then of course, researching the programs, researching the industry that you want to go into, and the networking that I talked about earlier within the school community. So all of that takes time, and you want to make sure that you have enough time to allocate to all of that. And you also want to think about something that often happens, which is, all of a sudden, in the middle of doing all of this, you may get a big project at work. So you want to make sure you're not cutting yourself, short and putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be up all night working on your application.
Yeah, it's not like a high school test that you can just stay up all night or knock out that paper and move on.
That's right. The reflection piece, you just have to, it just takes time. It takes time to for that self-reflection to really define your goals and what it is that you want to do and how you want to position yourself, developing your story, it takes time.
Okay, so one last thing before we go to the Q&A, which is this. I'll ask each of you to give me one vital tip that you can offer people in the audience who are about to apply to a highly selected business school.
I'm going to start. I'm going to suggest that, as you were mentioning, you cannot stay up the night before. It doesn't work. I know everyone on this call is really used to a lot of caffeine, little sleep, and getting things done. But self-reflection does take a long time. Start your application forms early, because those also take a lot longer than you might think. And I can't tell you the number of times, and it's not just like you're going to misspell the name of the school that you're applying to, but there is so much that you can actually use that application form for, as far as presenting who you are and what matters to you, aside from the essays and the recs, that it's really a lost opportunity if you don't use it to your advantage. So I always tell students, as soon as it comes out, just log in and set it up so you can start to populate it, and don't wait until the night before the deadline, because nothing good ever happens the night before the deadline. Our in-house rule is get it in 2 days before, actually, just in case the servers crash, which I've seen happen. So you want to make sure that not only are your recommenders in, but that you, and the other piece of this is you'll actually start to feel like you're in it. You want to start to invest in this process, and a great way to do that is by getting those, typing in your name on the application. It's a good place to start.
Great.
So I would say my tip would be to work really closely with your recommenders. Identify recommenders that you have a good relationship with. You'll want to make sure that that you prep them and you explain to them what the school values are of the different schools you're applying to. Explain to them, if possible, what your goals are, so that they can talk about that in the how that applies in the recommendation letter, and try to make things as easy as possible for them. So think about examples and stories that they could use, and talk through those with them. So strong communication with your recommenders is really essential in order to have solid recommendations.
I know most people suggest writing a memo to your recommender just to refresh his or her memory about projects you may have worked on, or what contributions you made, so that the recommender can be as specific as possible when they actually write into the form. Yeah.
I think that's very good advice. Yeah.
And Heidi, what's your big tip for today's audience today?
Let's see, I would say my recommendation really is to give the process the time and the attention that it deserves. I mean, if you want to put through a good application, you're going to need to put in some blood, sweat, and tears and give it the right amount of time. And if you approach the process not so much as, I want to get in, as really as what it should be, which is, what is it that I want, and why do I want it, and how is an MBA going to help me? I think if you can actually go through that process and answer those questions honestly, you're going to come out at the other end with a very good application, and also much more self-awareness about yourself, and it's very beneficial, the entire process. So allow the process the time that it needs, and allow your passion to come through and shine through in the application. Don't try to craft an application that's at what you think that they want to hear. Let your passion about what you want really come through the application, because that ultimately is what these schools are looking for, is someone who has the passion and the will and the ability to do great things. And if you can let that come through in your application, you have a very good chance.
Great. Okay, so let's do a little Q&A. If you have a question for Judith, Heidi, or Malvina, shoot away. And incidentally, if your question isn't answered by us, you can still email us. Melissa will send the info at fortunaadmissions.com. And so let's see what we have here. Now, for some reason, my question box is empty, but I'm sure that there are a lot of questions here.
I'm going to read the first one that I see.
I can see a few. Do we want to read? Yeah.
So the first question that we got, which is a great one, how impactful is the undergrad GPA to admissions folks?
Whoa, okay.
That's a good jumping off point.
That's a good one.
So I'm going to answer it since I asked it. I'm going to say that the undergrad GPA is important, but it's also what you were studying, how you got your GPA, and how it's, are there reasons that it's maybe not where you wanted it to be? So there's a certain amount of leeway that goes on. They're going to be qualitative classes are surely graded differently than quantitative classes. Individuals that were studying at certain kinds of institutions where maybe it was graded on a curve or not graded on a curve. What were the other impacts that were going on that might have affected your undergrad GPA? So it sounds like a broken record, but a lot of things that we're saying here today is that not everything is set in stone. So a 3.1 from XYZ school means something different to everybody. And there may have been a lot of reasons that it wasn't a 3.5 and also that it wasn't a 2.8, right? So you're there's reasons for everything. And I'm going to answer an associated question about, lack of quantitative undergrad or low quantitative undergrad and what can you do to rectify that or address that. And that's something that we talk with our students a lot about. So I guess it's just, for starters, how impactful is the undergrad GPA? It matters, but it also matters in context. And that's really important to think about. Don't take yourself out of the competition because you think, oh, my school wasn't so well known and I did really poorly at a very, very well-known school. That's all sort of taken with a grain of salt in a discussion. And I don't know if one of you guys, Heidi or Malvina, want to answer, how do you manage an undergrad quant that's maybe not as strong as you might like? I don't know if one of you guys want to answer, what we tell our clients about that.
Okay.
If the GMAT is
in
so yeah, I think that just as you said, Judith, the admissions is looking really at the full picture, and GMAT is just one aspect of the application. If you look at HBS's range, for example, it goes from 510 to 790. The median is 730, but really the range is quite wide. And you have to think about, how do you differ from the rest of the applicants? And what else do you have to offer that could be unique or interesting, and that could make for an interesting proposition for creating that classroom that we talked about, that HBS classroom. That so do you have unusual work experience and really interesting projects that you worked on, international work experience, and highlighting those if you do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, back to Judith's point, this, you can't look at this in isolation because admissions people are looking at all the components of an application, and given what your profile is and given what your stats are and how well you execute on an application, that is really kind of what determines how much weight is placed on any one given component. Yeah, there are general guidelines probably, and most people would agree that your GMAT score is extremely important, but it varies all across the map, right?
Mm-hmm.
It definitely does, and we're getting some more interesting questions coming through. If John, I don't know if you can see them yet, but I'm happy to.
No, I don't know why, but none of them are in my box here. I'm blank. So why don't you keep handling that, Judith?
Sure. I don't want to overstep my bounds as a non-moderator, but here's a question: how honest can you be about not being very clear about your post-MBA goals? So the individual that wrote this said, I'd like to transition from my family business to general management, but I'm not sure about the sectors. And I know both Heidi and Malvina work with these kinds of questions a lot, so either of you might want to dive in. That would be great.
Yes,
Sure.
I mean, I think I would definitely encourage that person to network, right? To reach out to as many people and just try to get a sense of the different industries and sectors and the different career paths within those sectors. That being said, I think there's definitely a case for presenting your goals as, if you're presenting your goals as general management and the type of company that you would be interested in working in. Startup versus something that's large, established, global, international. So there are some parameters that you can define in your career visions without necessarily saying, getting very, very specific in your goals. I think one of the things that you want to reassure admissions is that you'll be employable and that you're not going to come up as an unemployed student in their stats. That's you have to realize that is a concern for the school.
Right.
So if you can reassure them that that's not going to be an issue, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would just add, I think that's exactly right, that you want to make sure that I would do some more work. I mean, I wouldn't be completely open-ended in terms of I really don't know what I want to do. I would put in some time thinking about what you might want to do and researching those sectors and talking to people there and understanding trends and things that are happening and things that are interesting to you so that you have at least some direction to go towards. I mean, having nothing is not very helpful. So I would use the time to put in the work to actually have, if not a total goal, but a somewhat a direction to go in. I think that's important.
And I know we're just up at the hour. I don't know if we have time for one more, or John? I'm going to answer a couple more as long as we've got everybody on the line. So here's a question about, excuse me, I'm scrolling through. They're coming fast and furiously. You had talked about very traditional applicants trying to show their uniqueness. What are your thoughts about non-traditional applicants trying to show that they could fit well into your program? Are you turned away from non-traditional applicants for particular reasons? So I can
speak to that.
Yeah,
it's a great
question. And I actually,
it's a great question.
I used to run the non-traditional program at Wharton, so it's something that's really near and dear to my heart. So we're never turned away from non-traditional applicants, I can tell you that much. And Malvina, I'm going to throw it back to you.
No, yeah, we're excited because it's interesting to work with applicants who are coming from a non-traditional background, and I can talk to you a little bit about working with someone who was coming from a non-business background. And initially, when I worked with this person, they felt that, how can I, this is such a different world. I don't even know how to talk about it. I don't know what to highlight. I don't know what my strengths are. I don't know what my weaknesses are. And we worked on really identifying, what they did, and pulling out those leadership skills and pulling out all of those transferable skills that could apply to that person's goal, which were business related. So absolutely, I think that non-traditional backgrounds are extremely interesting, and it's all about understanding how you can talk about your experiences so that they relate to your goals and so that you can relate them to what the school is looking for as well, and how you could contribute to the class experience.
Heidi, I don't know if you have anything to add on that question about your work with non-traditional candidates.
Well, I would just say, yeah. Well, I was a non-traditional candidate, and I know that I've worked with many non-traditional candidates. I think that the key for non-traditional candidates is, as Malvina has said, you really want to find the skills that are important that you have in your background, because you definitely will have them, and make sure that you highlight them. It is also important, I would say, for the non-traditional candidates to really put in the time necessary to try to get the best GMAT score as possible, because that is a baseline that a lot of the schools will be looking at, that if they don't have this traditional background that they can say, well, they've been a banker, we know that they can do the work. You need to be able to show that you are going to be able to do the work in some way. And so the GMAT is one of those, your past history, your past your GPA is important. Any classes that you might have taken outside of university that show that you have the quantitative skills also can be important.
Taking a
so there's a lot of
you know,
kind of data points that you can bring in that will be important as a non-traditional candidate, but certainly finding those leadership skills. Sorry. There you go.
Great, thank you. John, back to you. I think maybe we're going to answer one more question. I just want to answer one more, and then I think what we're going to encourage you to do is send us additional questions. We do have a 30-minute free consultation. We're more than happy to speak with you and answer some specific questions that you may have. So if you don't get your question, from this next couple of minutes, please let us know. We love talking with prospective students. And the question is from someone who is a little bit out of the average entering age. So the question is, now I just lost it. I'm 33 or 34. Are schools going to sort of be, not as interested in me because they're wondering what I'm going to bring to the conversation? And is this considered too old for me, so to speak? And I know, again, that all of us have worked with clients and students along the way that have not necessarily fit that mold of being sort of in the average, 26 to 28-year-old framework. And do you have any words of advice, Malvina or Heidi, for students that may be a little bit older than the standard?
I would encourage that person to really look at the different programs and look at the the student makeup of the programs. Reach out to appropriate clubs and just get a sense of what the student culture is like, and what that environment would be like, and visit the schools just to really get a sense. I think that some schools will be a bit more open to a profile with more years of experience than other schools. So that's something that you really want to look into.
I would also say that you want to make sure that when you're talking about your post-MBA goals, I think that in that case you do need to be very specific and very clear about why you're coming to do the MBA now at this point in your career, why you didn't do it earlier, or why you need it at this point. So I think that as long as you have a very clear argument there and actually can demonstrate that you have this unique perspective that you can bring to the class, there are always going to be older people in the program. There's always those outliers. So there's room for everyone, but you do have to have a pretty special perspective to be able to add in a very clear goal, I would say.
Great. So, John, we're going to toss it back to you, and I think maybe wrap up. I'm not sure John can hear me. Okay. So, on behalf of Poets and Quants and John Byrne, who has been our host for this afternoon's discussion, we're so excited that we had the opportunity to speak with you, and I wanted to thank my co-panelists, Malvina Miller-Complainville and HIllis. We are really excited about this upcoming admission cycle, and as you can tell, we are eager to jump in. So, looking forward to hearing from you. Please don't please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can see our email address. More than happy to have a half-hour free consultation with you and speak a little bit more about your interest in applying to business school, the kinds of things you might want to think about moving forward, and how we can be of help. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your day wherever you may be, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Be well. Thank you.
Bye.